We begin with a live shot of the Hennepin County Courthouse in Minneapolis. And a courtroom in that courthouse is the focus of the world this morning for a generational reckoning over racial justice in the United States. George Floyd's death had millions of Americans, Canadians, and people around the world marching in one of the biggest protests in generations. And in that courtroom, opening arguments begin in just 2 hours at the trial of the former police officer accused of murdering George Floyd. He's now an icon, of course, his image memorialized in murals and tributes across the U.S. and here in Canada. His death at the hands of that Minneapolis police officer last May set off a debate over race, policing, and justice, and is driving political and social calls for change. Derek Chauvin, the former officer, recorded on video, kneeling on Floyd's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, is charged with second and third degree murder and manslaughter. The trial will be televised live. It's being called one of the most consequential in the United States in decades. And CBC News has a team in Minneapolis to bring you full coverage of that trial. Our Stephen D'Souza is part of that team. He's live just outside the courthouse. I think we're going to be talking about security based on the backdrop I'm seeing there for you, Stephen. But let's begin with the opening arguments today in under 2 hours. What are we expecting to hear?
You know, of course, this story made headlines around the world, resonated with so many because of the video that was captured of the moments, the last moments of George Floyd's life. And that video is going to play a pivotal role in this trial. Expect the prosecution, when they deliver their opening arguments in a few hours from now, to really lay out a roadmap for this case. You talked about the 3 charges that Derek Chauvin is facing. The second-degree murder charge holds the highest burden of proof, and so look for the prosecution to talk about the video, but also to talk about the cause of death and use medical experts to say that Derek Chauvin's knee across George Floyd's neck was the direct cause of his death. We're also going to hear from family members throughout this trial to humanize George Floyd. And then on the other side, we're going to hear from the defense of Derek Chauvin, who are going to attempt to humanize Derek Chauvin, the police officer, and talk about his history, but also talk about the cause of death from their perspective. That's going to be a pivotal part of this case because they're going to contend that it wasn't the way that Derek Chauvin subdued George Floyd that led to his death, but it was drugs in his system and pre-existing medical conditions. So that's really what we're expecting to hear from today. And as you can see here, this is the scene outside the courthouse where there is fencing, barbed wire, concrete barriers surrounding the streets and this courthouse. Nobody is allowed in or out without going past large layers of security and National Guard troops, and they're inside the courtroom itself. Just one member of the family for each Derek Chauvin and George Floyd are allowed in, so, and only a couple members of the media, so limiting the number of people in the courtroom, really limiting around the building, or the access around the building as well, because they are expecting protests. Nobody here at the moment, but as this trial goes on, expecting to see a lot more people outside.
And as you say, Stephen, because of those precautions, COVID and otherwise, so few people allowed in the courtroom, we are going to see this live stream, live broadcast, which is quite an extraordinary thing for people in the U.S. to see, and to see how this administration of justice unfolds. What are people in Minneapolis telling you about this trial in terms of what they're bracing for, what they are expecting?
Yeah, we've been here for a few days now talking with community organizers and activists, and everyone you talk to, there's a palpable sense of tension and unease because they know that there's so much is riding on this trial, but at the same time, there's also a sense of familiarity and a sense that, you know, they've seen this movie before. They've seen it with other Black men who have been killed by white officers, where it seems that the system of justice is stacked in favor of the police. And it's interesting, as much as Derek Chauvin is on trial here, activists say that really the criminal justice system is on trial. And that's something that Reverend Al Sharpton spoke to last night at a vigil with some family members. He talked about just what's at stake in this trial. Take a listen to what he had to say.
We've seen cases after cases. The time has come for this country to show that nobody is above the law, that the fact that you're a policeman doesn't give you the right to do what you want to do. The criminal justice system is on trial. Chauvin is in the courtroom, but America's on trial.
Now, we also heard from two of the brothers of George Floyd last night. Terrence Floyd got very emotional, really spoke about his faith and how that's carrying him through this. And we're expecting to hear from the family later this morning, but let's listen to Terrence Floyd and what he had to say about this trial last night.
We're asking the system for the justice, but this gathering we're doing right now is what's needed. We're going to take not one knee, but both knees. Get down, and we're going to ask God for the justice, because our justice can't compare to his.
Now, interestingly, when you talk to community activists and organizers, they say no matter what the result of this trial, they hope it will continue to spur action for change in the system. And one community organizer told me, he says he knows what Derek Chauvin did. He saw it in the video. He says the key now is, does the county, does the criminal justice system recognize what Derek Chauvin did? And this trial will say how they value a black life.
Stephen, I'm looking forward to your coverage of all of this and to talking to you throughout. So thank you very much for this first report from Minneapolis. It certainly won't be our last conversation. Stephen D'Souza, part of our CBC News team there.